The train pulled into Millfield Station at 11:47 p.m., exactly 3 minutes late as always. I knew this because Dad had texted me the delay statistics for this particular route over the past 6 months, complete with a graph he'd made in Excel. Labeled, color-coded, and updated religiously every week like it was a stock portfolio. That was Dad, turning everything into data, finding patterns in the mundane. I used to find it embarrassing. Now, stepping off the train into the December cold, I found myself oddly comforted by his predictability. He was waiting by the old Subaru, hands stuffed in the pockets of the same winter coat he'd worn since I was in middle school. The parking lot lights cast long shadows, and I could see his breath in the cold air as he spotted me and smiled. That quiet smile that barely moved his mouth but transformed his whole face, crinkling the corners of his eyes and making him look 10 years younger. "Right on time," he said, taking my duffel bag. 3 minutes late is practically early for the 11:44. "You've been tracking it?" "Just keeping an eye on things." He loaded my bag into the trunk with the careful precision he brought to everything. "Your mother's asleep, but she left soup on the stove. Chicken noodle, the kind with the fat egg noodles you like." The drive home was quiet. Streetlights painted fleeting stripes of orange across the dashboard while NPR played softly on the radio. Dad didn't pepper me with questions about finals or grades or my plans after graduation in 5 months. He just drove, occasionally pointing out changes in town. The Richardsons had repainted their house. The old video store was becoming a yoga studio. Mrs. Murphy's oak tree had finally come down in the November storm. I found myself really looking at him for the first time in years. When had his hair gone completely gray at the temples? When had those lines around his eyes become permanent? He caught me staring and raised an eyebrow. "Do I have something on my face?" "No, I didn't know how to finish that sentence. I just realized I haven't really seen you in 3.5 years? I just noticed you're getting older?" "Tired, I guess." "Finals are rough," he agreed. "But you're done now, home for 3 weeks. Home. The word sat strangely in my mouth. Was this still home? My dorm room didn't feel like home either. I existed in some liminal space between who I'd been and who I was becoming, and neither place quite fit anymore. The house smelled exactly as it always had. A mixture of Mom's lavender candles, coffee that had been sitting too long in the pot, and something indefinable that was just the accumulated scent of 23 years of family life. My room was exactly as I'd left it in August, down to the psychology textbook I'd forgotten to pack still sitting on my desk. I ate soup at the kitchen table while Dad sat across from me, drinking decaf coffee from his favorite mug. The one I'd made in second grade art class that said Wordle's best dad in uneven letters. He'd used it every day for 15 years. "How's the thesis coming?" he asked. "It's coming." I stirred my soup, watching the noodles swirl. "My advisor thinks I'm being too ambitious, trying to cover too much ground." "What's it about again?" "The intersection of behavioral economics and climate change policy. Basically, how to use psychological insights to encourage more sustainable behavior." Dad nodded slowly, the way he did when he was really thinking about something. "Sounds important. Also sounds like you're trying to save the world in 50 pages. 40 pages, actually. And yeah, maybe." "Nothing wrong with big ambitions," he said. "Just remember, change usually happens in small increments, little decisions that add up over time." I wanted to roll my eyes. There was Dad with his engineer's perspective, always breaking things down into manageable pieces. But something stopped me. Maybe it was the late hour or the familiar comfort of the kitchen, but I found myself actually listening. "Is that how you've always approached things?" I asked. He looked surprised by the question. "I suppose so. Your mother calls it incremental progress toward an undefined goal." "That sounds like Mom." "She's usually right." He smiled into his coffee. "Don't tell her I said that." I went to bed in my childhood room, surrounded by remnants of who I used to be, Debate trophies, band photos, a periodic table poster I'd begged for in 10th grade. From down the hall, I could hear Dad's routine, checking the locks, turning off lights, the soft murmur of him talking to Mom when she stirred. The same sounds I'd fallen asleep to for 18 years. The next morning, I woke to the smell of pancakes and the sound of Mom humming in the kitchen. She was at the stove wearing her Saturday morning uniform of yoga pants and one of Dad's old conference t-shirts. Her hair was pulled back in a messy bun, and she was dancing a little to the radio as she flipped pancakes. "Morning, stranger," she said without turning around. "Coffee's fresh. Your mug's in the dishwasher." My mug. Like my room, it had been waiting for me. A chip on the handle from when I'd knocked it against the sink junior year of high school. Future Nobel Prize winner written on the side in fading letters. A gift from my aunt when I'd won the science fair. "Thanks." I poured coffee, adding the exact amount of cream I'd used since I was 16 and Mom first let me drink coffee. "Need help?" "Sure, you can set the table. Your father's in the garage, probably reorganizing his tool drawer for the 100th time." We worked in comfortable silence, moving around each other with the practiced ease of years of Saturday morning routines. Mom had made enough pancakes for an army, as usual. "You never know who might stop by," she always said, though no one ever did. But she kept making extra, just in case. "So," she said as we sat down to eat, "tell me about life. The real stuff, not the highlight reel you give us on phone calls." "Life is complicated." "Life usually is at 21. Any specific complications or just the general variety?" I found myself telling her things I hadn't planned to share, about how my roommate had moved out mid-semester to deal with family issues, leaving me alone in our double. About how my friend group had fractured after a complicated romantic situation I'd tried to stay out of, but got pulled into anyway. About how Professor Martinez, who I'd idolized for 3 years, had turned out to be dismissive and condescending when I'd proposed my thesis topic. Mom listened, really listened, occasionally making small sounds of understanding but not interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment, then said, "Sounds like you're learning that people are complicated, even the ones we admire, especially the ones we admire." "Is that supposed to make me feel better?" "No, it's supposed to make you wiser." She sipped her coffee. "When I was your age, I thought wisdom meant having answers. Now I think it means being comfortable with questions." "Very zen, Mom." 3 years of yoga teacher training. Had to rub off eventually. She grinned, then grew serious again. "You know what I've learned, teaching yoga to middle-aged women with bad knees and too much stress?" "What?" "Everyone's just trying their best with what they have. Your roommate, your friends, even Professor What's-His-Name. Doesn't mean their best is good enough, doesn't mean you have to accept it. But understanding it helps." Dad came in then, a smudge of grease on his cheek, and satisfaction in his eyes. "Fixed the dryer vent. Should run more efficiently now." "My hero," Mom said dryly, "saving us dozens of cents in energy costs." "Dozens of cents add up," Dad replied, stealing a pancake from the stack. "Also, it was a fire hazard." "Everything's a fire hazard to you," Mom teased. "Most things are if you think about it," Dad said seriously, and Mom and I burst out laughing. "What?" Dad looked between us, genuinely puzzled. "It's true. Lint is extremely flammable." That became the pattern of my days home. Small moments of connection, quiet observations, the steady rhythm of my parents' life together. I watched them more closely than I had in years, seeing them not as Mom and Dad, but as Margaret and Stephen, 2 people who'd built a life together out of small daily decisions. I noticed how Dad always refilled Mom's coffee without being asked, how he knew exactly how much cream she wanted based on the time of day. I saw how Mom left sticky notes on his computer monitor, reminders about appointments, yes, but also random jokes or observations. "The cardinal is back at the feeder. He looks pompous." "Your hair looks nice today." "Don't forget you're wonderful." They had their Thursday night routine, grocery shopping together, even though it would be more efficient to go separately. They walked every aisle, debating the merits of different pasta sauces and whether they needed more frozen peas. They'd been shopping at the same store for 20 years, knew every employee by name. "Why don't you just order groceries online?" I asked one Thursday, tagging along out of boredom. They looked at each other, having one of those silent conversations that long-married couples perfect. "We tried it once," Mom said. "It was efficient," Dad added. "Too efficient," Mom continued. "No chance for spontaneous cookie purchases." "No running into neighbors," Dad said. "No weekly argument about whether tomatoes are a fruit or a vegetable." "They're botanically a fruit, but culturally a vegetable," Dad stated, and Mom groaned. 23 years we've been having this argument," she told me. "You'd think he'd give up by now." "You'd think you'd admit I'm right by now," Dad countered, and they grinned at each other like teenagers. I found myself envying them, not in a bitter way, but with a kind of wistful longing. My college relationships had been all passion and drama, burning bright and flaming out. Here was something different, a love that expressed itself in grocery store debates and coffee refills, in knowing exactly how the other person liked their eggs and remembering to record their favorite show. One evening, I was struggling with my thesis, papers spread across the dining room table, when Dad sat down across from me. "Need help?" "Not unless you suddenly became an expert in behavioral economics." "Can't say I have, but I know a bit about human behavior." He picked up one of my charts. "What's this showing?" "Survey responses about willingness to change consumption habits. See how there's a huge gap between what people say they'll do and what they actually do?" Dad studied the chart. "Reminds me of New Year's resolutions. Everyone's going to the gym in January." "Exactly. That's part of what I'm exploring, the intention-action gap." "We deal with that in engineering all the time," Dad said. "The design that works perfectly in theory but fails in practice because it doesn't account for human nature." "Like what?" He leaned back, thinking. "Well, there was this project years ago. We designed a beautiful recycling system for an office building. Color-coded bins, clear signage, the works. 6 months later, contamination rates were through the roof. People just threw trash wherever." "So what did you do?" "We watched. Literally sat in the break room and watched what people actually did. Turns out the bins were in the right places according to traffic flow, but not where people naturally wanted to dispose of things. They'd finish their coffee at their desk and have to walk past the trash to get to the recycling. So they'd just use the trash." "You moved the bins?" "We moved the bins. Contamination dropped by 60%. He shrugged. "Sometimes the solution isn't changing human behavior, it's designing around it." I stared at him, my pen resting forgotten on the page. All my complex theories suddenly seemed flimsy next to his simple, profound observation. "Dad, that's actually brilliant. Can I use that example?" "Sure, though I don't know if it's brilliant. Seemed pretty obvious once we paid attention." But that was Dad, I was starting to realize. He noticed things, small things. The way people actually behaved versus how they were supposed to behave. The patterns in train delays. The exact amount of cream in Mom's coffee. Later that night, I found Mom in her studio. A converted bedroom where she did her lesson planning and practiced yoga. She was in warrior pose, holding it with a stillness I envied. "Can I join you?" "Of course. Matt's in the closet." We moved through a simple sequence together. I'd taken yoga classes at college, but they were all about achievement. Perfect poses, advanced variations, pushing yourself to the edge. Mom's practice was different, quieter. She held each pose like she was having a conversation with it. "You're fighting yourself," she observed as I struggled with triangle pose. "Try being curious instead of correct." What does that even mean? Instead of thinking, I must do this pose perfectly, try thinking, I wonder what this pose has to teach me today. Very yoga teacher of you. Occupational hazard, but seriously, try it. I did. Instead of forcing my body into the shape I thought it should make, I explored what it wanted to do. I felt a tight muscle in my shoulder finally release, and as it did, the pose became easier, more stable. "Huh," I said. "Huh, indeed." Mom moved into another pose. Works for more than yoga, by the way, being curious instead of correct. "Is this about my thesis?" "Is it?" She glanced at me sideways. "You tell me." I thought about how frustrated I'd been, trying to force my ideas into the shape my advisor wanted. Maybe the answer wasn't forcing anything. Maybe it was being curious about why the shape wasn't working. "You're annoying when you're right," I told her. "I'm annoying when I'm wrong, too. Consistency is important." The next day was Sunday, and I watched my parents move through their weekend ritual. Dad made breakfast, always eggs on Sunday, scrambled for him, over easy for Mom, and whatever I wanted, poached, which he grumbled about but made perfectly. Mom read the entire newspaper, passing sections to Dad with commentary. Another article about millennials killing something. This time it's doorbells. Dad read the business section while eating, occasionally sharing particularly dry economic news in a dramatic voice that made Mom laugh. They had their Sunday fight too, always about the same thing: what to do with the afternoon. Mom wanted to be spontaneous, Dad wanted a plan. They'd been having variations of this argument for longer than I'd been alive. "We could drive to the lake," Mom suggested. "It's December. The lake will be freezing. We don't have to swim, just walk around. Or we could finish organizing the basement." "Steven, it's Sunday." "Organization doesn't take weekends." They went back and forth, but I noticed something I'd missed as a kid. They enjoyed it. The argument was almost ritualistic, comfortable. They'd compromise, they always did, usually ending up doing something that was neither fully spontaneous nor fully planned. That Sunday, they ended up at the farmer's market, Dad's choice for efficiency, but stayed extra long talking to vendors and buying things they didn't need. Mom's spontaneity. I tagged along, watching them navigate the crowds, hands occasionally brushing, unconsciously orienting toward each other like plants toward sun. "Your parents are adorable," Priya, my high school friend, texted after seeing my Instagram story of them debating apple varieties. Were they? I'd spent so many years being embarrassed by their ordinariness. Dad with his spreadsheets and his sensible shoes. Mom with her yoga wisdom and her inability to pass a dog without petting it. They weren't cool parents. They didn't have exciting careers or interesting hobbies. They just were. But maybe that was the point. One evening, while Mom was at her book club, Dad and I ended up watching a nature documentary together. His choice, of course. Something about bird migration that I thought would bore me, but turned out to be fascinating. "Arctic terns," Dad said during a commercial. "They migrate from Arctic to Antarctic and back every year. Longest migration in the animal kingdom. 70,000 kilometers. That's insane. They do it for the summer, endless summer, chasing the light." He was quiet for a moment. "Always thought that was beautiful, dedicating your whole life to finding the light." "Very poetic for you, Dad." He chuckled. "I have my moments. Your mother brings them out." "How did you know?" I asked suddenly. "With Mom. How did you know she was the one?" Dad muted the TV, giving the question real consideration. "I don't think I did know, not in some lightning bolt way. We met at work. She was in marketing, I was in engineering. Kept ending up on the same projects. She made me laugh. I apparently made her think, though I'm not sure that's as good a trade." "But when did you know you loved her?" "Probably when she got food poisoning from bad sushi on our 5th date. I spent the night holding her hair back and bringing her ginger ale. Somewhere around 3 a.m., she looked up at me, absolutely miserable, and said, 'This is not how I planned to seduce you.' And I just thought, I want to take care of this person. Not just tonight, but all the nights. That's actually really romantic." "Your mother disagrees. She wanted a better story. I told her the truth is better than a good story. What did she say to that? That the truth is a good story, if you tell it right. He smiled. She was right, of course. The documentary came back on, but I wasn't watching anymore. I was thinking about love built on small moments, on being present for the unglamorous parts, on choosing the same person over and over in ordinary ways. My thesis draft was due 3 days after New Year's, and I was panicking. Everything I'd written felt forced, academic in the worst way. I was sitting at the kitchen table, surrounded by papers and despair, when Mom sat down with her marking. "Want to talk about it?" she asked, not looking up from the 5th grade essays she was grading. "It's all wrong. I'm trying to create some grand unified theory of behavioral change, and it's just not working." She made a note on an essay. "This kid wrote about his hamster for a person who inspires me assignment. Technically wrong, but beautifully done. What do you think? Full marks?" "Mom, I'm having a crisis here." "I know, honey, and I'm asking you about a hamster essay. What do you think?" I looked at the essay. The kid had written about how his hamster, Mr. Whiskers, never gave up trying to escape his cage, even though he never succeeded. How that determination inspired him to keep trying at math even when it was hard. "Full marks," I said. "He answered the real question, even if he interpreted it differently." "Exactly," Mom smiled. "Maybe you're doing the same thing, answering the real question, just not the one you think you're supposed to answer." "What's the real question?" "You tell me. What made you interested in this topic in the first place?" I thought back to my junior year, to the lecture that had sparked my interest. It hadn't been about grand theories. It had been about a simple study showing that people were more likely to recycle when bins had silly faces on them. Something so small, so human. I wanted to understand why people do things that don't make sense, I said slowly. Why we know what's good for us, but don't do it. "Sounds like you're not really writing about economics or climate policy," Mom said. "Sounds like you're writing about being human." She was right. Of course she was right. I spent the next 2 days rewriting, but this time I started small. Instead of trying to explain all human behavior, I focused on tiny changes. The recycling bins Dad had talked about, the way my roommate started bringing reusable bags to the store after we decorated them in a craft night, how my mom's yoga students were more likely to practice at home when she gave them 2-minute routines instead of 20-minute ones. "Incremental progress toward an undefined goal," I muttered, and smiled despite myself. Christmas came and went in a blur of familiar traditions. The tree in the same corner as always. Mom's sugar cookies that were always slightly burnt on the bottom. Dad's annual reading of "'Twas the Night Before Christmas," complete with voices, even though I was far too old for it. The quiet joy of being together, no pressure to be anywhere else or anyone else. On New Year's Eve, we watched the ball drop on TV, Mom falling asleep on Dad's shoulder around 11:30 as usual. Dad and I clinked glasses of sparkling cider at midnight. "Resolutions?" he asked. "Maybe. You?" "Same as every year. Try to be a little better than I was before." "That's vague." "Specific goals are overrated. Direction matters more than destination." "Did you get that from Mom's yoga teacher training?" "No, fortune cookie, but don't tell her that." I laughed, then grew serious. "Dad, thank you." "For what?" "For being you and Mom, for showing me that ordinary life can be extraordinary, that wisdom doesn't have to come in grand pronouncements, that love looks like knowing someone's coffee order and having the same argument about Sunday plans for 20 years. Dad blinked rapidly, then cleared his throat. "Well, yes, you're welcome." Very articulate. "Words are your mother's department. I just fix things. You do more than that." "Sometimes," he agreed. "Sometimes fixing things means just being there while they work themselves out." The next morning, New Year's Day, I submitted my thesis draft, 42 pages about small changes and daily choices. about the intersection of human nature and human aspiration. My advisor might hate it, but for the first time, I'd written something true. "How does it feel?" Mom asked, finding me in the kitchen after hitting send. "Terrifying. Good. Like jumping off a cliff and realizing you might actually know how to fly. That's usually how the best things feel." My train back to school left on January the 2nd, same 11:44 p.m. departure. Dad drove me to the station, Mom riding along this time. We sat in the car for a few minutes before I had to go, watching other families say goodbye. "Thank you," I said again. "Both of you, for everything." "Stop thanking us for being your parents," Mom said, but she was crying a little. "It's literally our job." "Best job I ever had," Dad added. "Excellent benefits. 100% would recommend." "You're such a dad," I groaned. "Occupational hazard." I hugged them both, breathing in their familiar scents. Mom's lavender hand cream, Dad's old-fashioned aftershave. For a moment, I was 5 years old again, safe in the circle of their arms. Then the moment passed, and I was 21, heading back to my life, but carrying their wisdom with me. "Call when you get in," Mom said. "Text, don't call," Dad corrected. "It'll be 3 a.m. "Call quietly," Mom compromised, and they grinned at each other. As the train pulled away, I watched them through the window. They stood there until I couldn't see them anymore. Mom leaning into Dad, his arm around her shoulders, both of them backlit by the harsh parking lot light, looking smaller and somehow more permanent in the distance. Two ordinary people who'd built an extraordinary life out of small moments and daily choices. My phone buzzed, a text from Dad. "Train is on time, good start to the semester. P.S. Your mother says to remember to be curious, not correct." I smiled, settling back in my seat. Outside, the familiar landscape rolled by, but I was seeing it differently now, not as something to escape from, but as the foundation that had shaped me. In my bag, next to my laptop and textbooks, was a small container of Mom's cookies, only slightly burnt, and a note from Dad with train delay statistics for the return route at spring break. Small gestures, ordinary love, the kind that doesn't announce itself but speaks volumes in its consistency, the kind that quietly reorients you, like gravity you'd forgotten was there. I thought about my thesis, not as a grand theory, but as a collection of small truths, like Dad's recycling bins. Wisdom, I realized, wasn't something you found in a textbook. It was something you noticed, like the way Mom left sticky notes on Dad's monitor, or the comfortable silence of their Saturday morning routine. Love wasn't a lightning bolt. It was the 1,000 tiny choices to show up, to pay attention, to argue about tomatoes in the grocery aisle for the 23rd year in a row. The train carried me back to school, but I was different than when I'd left 3 weeks ago. Not dramatically changed, but shifted, like one of Dad's incremental improvements or Mom's curious, not correct philosophy. I was still figuring out who I was, still navigating the space between child and adult. But now I had a better map, drawn in coffee refills and Sunday arguments, in burnt cookies and train statistics, in the quiet wisdom of two people who'd figured out that extraordinary lives are built one ordinary day at a time. My phone buzzed again. A photo from Mom of her and Dad already at the kitchen table, mugs of coffee in hand, probably debating what to do with their Sunday. The caption read, "Missing our third vote on spontaneous versus planned. Dad's pushing for basement organization again. Send help." I typed back, "Be curious about the basement, maybe it wants to stay messy." Mom's response was immediate. "That's my girl." Dad's follow-up made me laugh out loud. "The basement doesn't have wants. It's an inanimate space. But I see your point. Maybe." I put my phone away and closed my eyes, letting the rhythm of the train lull me toward sleep. In 5 months, I'd graduate. After that, who knew? The future stretched ahead, uncertain and exciting. But whatever came next, I had my foundation. Two people who'd shown me that wisdom comes in many forms, that love is in the details, and that sometimes the most profound truths are found in the most ordinary places. The train rolled on through the night, carrying me forward but never really away from home. Because home, I'd learned, wasn't just a place. It was a rhythm, a scent, a quiet consistency, a map you didn't know you'd memorized until you needed it. It was the steady presence of people who knew your coffee order, who saved your childhood mug, who loved you enough to let you go, and wise enough to always leave the light on for your return.